welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Turn the Page. I'm Jen, one of your co-hosts today, and my other co-host is...
Hey, I'm Jessikah.
And we are here today with a really exciting writer who has given us the second volume in a really exciting new mystery series. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Absolutely. I am Veronica G. Henry, and I am the author of Bacchanal, The Quarter Storm, and most recently, The Foreign Exchange. The Foreign Exchange is my latest novel, and again, the second in the Mambo Reina series.
Nice. Yeah, I love the series and I love our protagonist. And before we get into the book itself, I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about, your journey as a writer and how it brought you to this series and to this story in particular.
Absolutely. So my journey is one, I wouldn't be on this journey if there wasn't for one person. So I was always a reader, like most writers, just always a reader. I always spent time with you guys in libraries from the time that I can remember. So those were sacred places to me. So being a long-term reader and a fairly good, writer of nonfiction stuff, articles, essays, that sort of thing. My husband is like, why don't you write a novel? And I'm like, I can't put that many words down on it. There's no way, not going to happen. Long story short, I eventually succumbed to his pressure and wrote my first book. Luckily, you will never see that book, never see the light of day. But I started writing many moons ago, and the journey is a tough one, as it is for a lot of writers. So you might write an entire novel or two or three that don't go anywhere, but then you write one. And I wrote my first novel, my debut, Bacchanal, probably a decade ago. And even then, the first draft of that book was finished, it was done, but I knew it wasn't what I needed to be. And I just wasn't a skilled enough writer to write that book at that time. So I put that to the side and went on and wrote a couple other things, kind of honed the craft, and then got into a really good mentorship program where I work with both Mary Robinette Kowal and Kate Marshall. They helped me really, really get that book into tip-top shape. And of course, that is the novel that landed me an agent. So kudos to both of them. Thank you, ladies. You are just invaluable, critical part to my career. So that's three people, I think in the first few minutes. But after I got my agent, then the work began. We went through a fairly long editing process with the novel because she's like, we got to make it perfect. It's good, it's great, but we're going to make it perfect. So after months and months of toil there, long story short, sold the novel, got my first 2-book deal. So Bacchanal Against the first, and then the second one was The Quarter Storm, and then The Foreign Exchange is my third. So that's kind of the journey to publication.
Yeah, that's really great. And I always get really tickled when authors, they talk about libraries being integral to their journey, because
Absolutely.
we really appreciate it. We like it when people sing our praises every now and then. You hear, like, whenever libraries are trending on Twitter, I'm like, oh,
okay,
what now?
It's always good stuff. Always good stuff.
Yeah. But no, it's really, I really, really appreciate it. So, like, one of the questions I have, so this is the second in this series. And this series has the main character, Reina. She is an amateur sleuth, but she is also a practitioner of Vodou. She's a Vodou priestess.
Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, personally, I was like, that was one of the things immediately that when I saw this series, I'm like, this is different. This is not something you've ever seen. And generally, when you see Vodou portrayed in books, and especially Hollywood, it's not this. This is very respectful to the fact that, hey, this is religion for people. This is old. Right. This is not flashy and you know, exploitative, and I thought that that was
Right.
great. So I really want to know about Reina, and about just sort of like some of the challenges, and how you decided that yes, the amateur sleuth in this mystery is going to be a practitioner of voodoo, and we're going to do it right.
Jessica, you kind of nailed it. This was something I had seen so many portrayals, right, in movies and even in books, um, that I just thought, okay, they're not doing this right. It's not right, and it's downright disrespectful a lot of the time. So I was actually reading some other stories. I read, Dresden. So I was reading Dresden, the first in that series, and I thought, and that was years and years ago again. And it's funny how, as a writer, sometimes you hear something, you see something, you read something, and it kind of gets filed away back there, and you may not think about it for years and years later. So that's kind of what happened with me. I think we were watching something, and it was also just a horrific portrayal of voodoo. And I thought, then that popped back into my head, and I'm like, I can do this, and I can do it better. So that's kind of where the idea came from. I'm a lover of mysteries, is all. Well, let's get this out of the way. I love all books, but I love mysteries. And I thought, if I can combine the two, that will truly be something different. A real hard-boiled mystery with a tradition that I could try to the best of my ability to portray in a more positive and respectful fashion. So um, the tough part, honestly, was deciding that I wanted to do this, because I was afraid. You know, I thought, if I don't get this right, I don't want to contribute to the negative narrative, and I don't want to offend anyone whose tradition this is, because it's not mine. But part of the fun of being a writer is that I get to read about the things that I'm curious about. You know, I get to study the things that I'm interested in, not just what they tell you to do in school. So I just kind of dove into research. So I started reading lots of books, not only on the tradition as it originated from West Africa, but also how it morphed a little bit, right, during the transatlantic slave trade, how that religion was brought with the enslaved folks, but then kind of changed, and how they consecrated some of the regular Catholic imagery onto that in order to protect themselves and to protect their religion. So the more I dove into the research, I just thought, this is more than I even knew. It was just so rich in history, so rich in tradition, that I thought, I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to try, and I'm going to do my best. And I did that by, again, reading, and then by also talking to practitioners and even academics. So I went to, university professors and people who study this and teach it, and who have made the travels that I wasn't able to make. So I did all of that and kind of combined it into my own narrative, with having to put a bit of a spin of a fantastical or speculative element on top of it. No small feat, but I enjoyed it.
That is no small feat. And, before before I fell into libraries, I was also an academic. And so I love, like, when I heard research, my ears just perked
Yeah.
up, spidey senses went up. And I'm wondering, like, if you could talk a little bit more about what your research process was like. And also, if you feel like writing about voodoo taught you something that you couldn't get from just reading about it. Like, does writing give you a different perspective instead of just reading about something?
Excellent questions. First, I have to go back to libraries. And one of the things I did in Cary was kind of reach out to their research librarian department, and got a call scheduled with one of the research librarians, and he was just awesome. I wish I could remember his name right now, but I don't. But we had a nice Zoom call where we kind of talked about the subject matter and what I was trying to write about. And he was awesome. So he came back with a whole slew of books for me to read, things to kind of delve deeper into, like the history of New Orleans and the tradition as it originated there or morphed there. And then he also gave me a ton of articles and just a bunch of other resources to kind of plow into. And that list was extensive. So he put a lot of work into it, and that just kind of gave me the roadmap for where to go to drive my process. So after doing a crap ton of reading and trying to gather my own thoughts on, what the religion or tradition, because there's some people that kind of fall on both sides of the fence. Some people see it as a religion. Yes, this is my religion, but some people say it's not as confined as a traditional religion, so it's more of a sacred tradition. So that was one of the things that I found during my research. But just after doing a lot of reading, even reading, there was a book by Sarah Bloom, I think it was called a Little Yellow House, I believe. But it's essentially a story, it's sort of a memoir, I think, about her family, and then also what happened after, Hurricane Katrina. So what that book did was serve to give me just a perspective, of someone who grew up there, born, raised there, but then also just a real insider's perspective on the storm. And then just that whole idea of family and what that looks like in that city as opposed to, other places. So that was one that was really key for my research. And then again, through all of that, finding the experts that I needed to talk to delve a little bit deeper, both from an academic, again, perspective, and then also from a practitioner perspective. So I got on the phone with a real live voodoo priestess, someone who has gone through that process, who's been initiated. And she was so gracious to share, what she could. And that's the thing. There are things, and I respect that she can't share with me, that she can't share with us. And that's fine. That's where I got to use my imagination. That's the fun part. But just having that opportunity to speak with her and then all the other folks, and then books are always my mentors. So just diving into that was kind of how I came up with, how I was going to tell the story. And you're absolutely right. Writing it even is different than reading it. So I could read it, I could take all of the stuff in on one level, but writing it and then trying to decide as I'm going through, well, wait, you probably shouldn't talk about that. Or yes, you can dive deeper into this thing. Or maybe just gloss over this because that's something that's really sacred to that tradition and you don't want to go too deep. So that was the difficult part of writing. It was this constant back and forth of what I could say, what I shouldn't say. And I also didn't want people, like some of the spells, for lack of a better word, that are in the book. There are things that I plucked out of books and things that I plucked out of other resources that I changed a bit. I may have changed one ingredient or two ingredients or something because I didn't want people to take this literally and then go and do stuff. So yeah, it was a struggle to kind of balance truth and imagination and respect for the tradition.
How did you find Reina's journey growing from the previous book to the foreign exchange? I know in this one, like the mystery is surrounding friends of hers.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, like, did you find her changing within the two stories? Did you feel like she was developing a little bit more here? Or did she kind of just like, was she sort of just who she was when she popped out when you were writing the first book?
It's difficult. This is my first time writing a series. So you have to think about that character arc from the beginning. And there are ways that you can really write yourself into a corner in the first book if you're not careful. So I try to be really careful and really mindful of that. But Reina as a character, I have an arc for her that I envision developing over many books, if I'm able to continue writing them. But for the second book, I wanted her to be not, a hard-boiled, seasoned detective at this stage, but I wanted her to be a bit of a better detective and a little less reticent in her desire to kind of dig into things. So that was the first thing that I thought about her as a character. She can't come in as green as she was on the first one, but I want to give her time to grow into this as well. So that was the first thing that I thought about. The second part of her character arc and development from book one to book two was just in not only her relationship, her romantic relationship and how that would change, but also the relationship she had with her friends and her, the people that are closest to her, and even her opposition in Lucian, the other voodoo priest. There had to be a history there between them that, again, I've plotted out over several books and plan to reveal a little bit at a time. So in book one, I kind of laid the seeds for that part of the mystery. So there's two things. There's the murder mystery, right, that she has to solve. And then there's the mystery about what happened to her mom during Hurricane Katrina. It's a decade later, and she's still, like a lot of people there, she still doesn't know. But I wanted to be able to tie those things, continue to tie those two things together, and unfold them in the mysteries as we go along. So yeah, just in terms of her relationships, in terms of her advancing a little bit on that second part of the mystery, and her being a little bit better sleuth.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the other influences maybe that like you were thinking about as you wrote, because when I was reading the setup, the beginning, you have a private investigator and a wife comes into the office with like, oh, my husband's up to something, but I don't know. And it was such
Right.
a classic noir setup. And I wonder if like that also a conscious influence, like, because I guess noir is kind of adjacent to like the hard-boiled mystery,
Yes.
like that's something that you were also thinking about, or
Absolutely. I love both, but I saw this definitely as more of a noir type mystery. And the whole setup, the interesting thing is when I finished book one, I already had an idea of what I wanted the mystery to be for book two. So that's why I introduced the character at the end of book one. And just for folks too that haven't necessarily read book one, you can read them independently, but I think you get a lot more from it, and you know the characters and the supporting cast a lot better if you read them both. But yeah, going into this one, the story I actually got from a John Wertheim story on 60 Minutes, and it was about college athletics. And we won't go too far into that, so we won't go into spoilers. But when I saw his story, I thought, yeah, that's got to somehow, I just knew that there was a story there, but I hadn't at that point decided that it was going to be in my mystery. So again, seeds get planted long before you actually end up using them. So as I was thinking about writing the second book, I thought, oh yeah, that story. And I was actually able to get him on the phone, of all people. You know how busy this guy must be. He was actually gracious enough to get on the phone with me from some airport in some very strange place. And we chatted about the story, and what he found, some of the things that he wasn't even able to include, in the 10 minutes or so that 60 Minutes gave him. But that was key and that was critical. Some of the things that he gave me obviously ended up finding a place in the book.
And part of that is too like plays into it being such a classic noir setup too, because you have like the personal drama, like the sort of familial or the husband-wife team, but then you also have like the rot, like under the surface of society. And, again, without giving too much away, because I think it is such a really important and very contemporarily important, like it touches on a lot of stuff happening right now, so like it's just also well done. I really enjoyed that aspect.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that was actually a lot of, it was a switch for me because my first novel was actually historic. It was a historical fantasy, and it was set during, the 30s. So totally different time period. Now, of course, this is historical, but much more contemporary. So it was just a mind shift as well as a writing shift between, book one and then these books as well. So writing in an urban, more contemporary fantasy setting was also a challenge because it's not the space that I was most comfortable in. But, as a writer, you have to continue to stretch yourself and grow. There was a concern because I'm like, okay, people who like me for historical, are they going to be able to get into this? And I'm like, trust your readers. They're able to go. If you tell them a good story, they're kind of able to go with you. So yeah, it was just a lot of fun. And there's so many moving parts that kind of went into this one, and bringing those all together into something that I was just so very happy with. Very satisfying to see it finally about to come out.
So, I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about the story that influenced this particular story? Because it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a story about the Africa, I think that it was titled Africa to NBA Pipeline. So it's a story about, the story was about athletes on the continent of Africa. Obviously, we've seen an influx probably over the last decade, I think, across football, obviously soccer, basketball, all that, from college sports all the way up to, the NBA. So the story was essentially about one very particular route to US athletics. and how, how that goes about, and some of the problems and challenges in the ways that certain athletes find their way onto American shores. And I think that's enough of a intro without going too far.
Yeah, I think so too. I wouldn't want to leap too much into it. It was just again, it was very, very, very interesting.
Yeah, it was a fascinating story. And I think even if you go to the 60 Minutes website, you might be able to see a clip or two of it still out there if you search.
It's been such a pleasure talking to you. And, before we wrap up, I would love to know, like, broadly speaking, what you have planned for Reina Dumond. Like, first off, I haven't said how cool her name is yet. Like, it's a very cool name. I love her. And without giving too much away, like, you've talked a little bit about knowing where her journey goes. Like, do you have volumes planned? Do you have like things in the works, or like, where are we going with this?
I actually have at least 2 more mysteries in my head already that I want to tell using Reina Dumond as the main character. I love her as a character, and thanks for the name. It took me so long. I had like 2 before I settled on that one. So yeah. But I have 2 other mysteries that I would love to write with her as the heroine, sleuth/detective. A lot will depend on how well this is received. But beyond that, I am also working on another strict fantasy novel that will probably be out next year. But again, if things go the way that I like, I will be more than happy to return to this world.
Yeah, I'm actually just curious because I'm going to say New Orleans, an important part of the setting of
It is.
Of the story.
And you know what, in particular, how the setting plays into the supporting cast too, I think, because so many really fun characters populate the story and sort of support Reina, and I'm wondering, like, were any of these people based on encounters you had in New Orleans, or people people who you sort of like perceived as you like visited the city, like, because it feels so lived in and real.
The research into the city, and I can't remember who it was, but I think it was some author that I really love, and I'm ashamed to not know the name. They said, but when you write things that are set in special places, make sure that you make that setting, that city, a character. So I had that in mind, when I was writing. So a lot of my research is not just voodoo or vodou. It's not just athletics. It's not all. It's the part of it is a large part of it is the city. So again, I think I told you, Jen, I visited just once. I've never lived there. But what I did was the only thing that you can do. I got as much as I could when I visited. But beyond that, talking to people who were residents. A person in my writing group was born and raised there. And then the other thing is things that you can find online, even going online and getting in chats or forums that are based in that city. You'd be surprised what you can pick up just lurking and listening and reading. So I did quite a bit of that. And the characters that I formed kind of came out of, I think, things that I've seen in the past and things that I kind of read about online. And then I took bits and pieces of those elements and constructed characters. I did that for Lucian. Tika actually was the first character to come to me. And I actually wrote a short story about her because I thought, she's really important. She's going to be important. And I want to know her as well as I can before I start. So wrote a short story that will, again, never see the light of day. But that was just kind of, that was my introduction to the story. And then all of the rest of them were kind of born out of, again, things that I read, things that I heard, people that people mentioned in conversation. But Sweet Belly was another one. Lucian was another one. They were kind of just all kind of brought together from things that I've come up with in my research. And they're just such fun characters. Whenever Lucian, Sweet Belly, and Tika are on the page, I'm like, okay, yeah, it's time to have some fun. So yeah, it was just a lot of fun making that city as important a character as I could in the book. And there's just so many, for other writers, there's so many resources now, even if you can't travel, videos and pictures and all of that sort of stuff is out there. So you can really get a good look and feel. I mean, I was literally on Google Maps dragging the thing around, trying to make sure I got the street names right, that, oh, if I turn right here, where am I going to be? Oh, no, it's a one-way street. So there was a lot of work that went into making sure that I got that piece right. And the best thing ever is the messages that I got from people, the emails and messages that I got from people who live in New Orleans that said, you got it right. You got it right.
That's amazing. And I am no expert on the city, but like from my perspective, you did get it right. And yeah, like it really communicates so much of what makes the city a special place and its residents special people. Like it's just like it's really real and vibrant and just like wonderful. And that is like, I will use that to segue into like my promo for the end of this. But if you love New Orleans, if you love noir and fantasy and super cool female protagonists, like you need to read these books. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. I had a really great time. And, if you ever want to come back and talk about her further adventures or, the fantasy book.
Or tell us about some of those short stories. I'm so sad it's never going to see the light of day.
I will absolutely come back and talk to you guys about the next book and everything else that I do with Reina coming forward. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right, y'all. So check out this book. When you listen to this, it will be available at your nearest bookstore or independent. Wait, oh gosh. I'm sorry, Jessica. I was going to say independent.
I kind of want to keep that in because that's awesome. Bookstore and independent library.
Your rogue library.
That is a book. That is an awesome idea for an amateur sleuth.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me write that down.
With that word.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. This has been Jen and my co-host,
Jessica.
Right. And it is time to close this chapter. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.